When I was 22 years old, I would often be home alone at my parents' house. We lived near a small lake that stretched across our backyard. On the other side of the lake was a quiet town park. The houses in our neighborhood were spaced out, and it was an upscale area with large properties compared to the rest of the town. I've since moved out, but this happened back when I was in college. My parents were well off and owned multiple properties, so I often found myself alone at home. It was a random night during the summer, sometime in late July. I can't recall if it was a weekend or a weekday, but since I was home, it was probably a weekday. I was sitting in the sunroom, which was my favorite spot in the house during the summer. The room was cozy, and the open windows brought in a gentle breeze. I was sitting on the corner of the couch nearest to the window when I suddenly heard splashing coming from the lake. At first I ignored it, thinking it might be a goose or a duck. They'd sometimes make a lot of noise in the water, especially if they were fighting. But as the splashing continued, it sounded too loud and heavy to be a bird. It sounded like a person was in the water. I turned down the volume of the TV and leaned closer to the window to listen. That's when I heard humming, a man's voice coming from the lake. I decided to step out onto the back deck to see what was going on. The backyard was pitch dark, but I could make out the faint sound of splashing and humming in the water. It was clear someone was swimming in the lake. Each house on the lake owned a specific section, so whoever it was had to be trespassing. Thinking it might be one of the neighbors, I turned on the backyard lights. As soon as the lights illuminated part of the lake, the splashing and humming stopped. Whoever it was had noticed me. I felt uneasy, so I went back inside, turned off the lights, and locked the door. I texted my sister Mia, who was away at college, about what had happened, but she didn't reply right away. I tried not to overthink it, but watching TV afterward was hard. My focus kept shifting back to the lake and the dark backyard. The TV was still on in the background, and the light from it must have made me visible from outside. I thought I heard something. A soft thud on the deck. My heart sank. I fumbled for the remote to turn off the TV, plunging the room into silence and darkness. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust, and that's when I heard it. Heavy breathing coming from just outside one of the windows. Panicked, I flattened myself on the couch, trying to hide. Suddenly, a deep voice from outside said, "I see you." My heart felt like it had stopped. I couldn't decide whether to stay silent or respond, so I blurted out, "James, is that you?" James was one of our neighbors, and I clung to the hope that it might just be him playing a prank. But there was no response, just the sound of footsteps retreating. After a few minutes, I forced myself to check that all the doors were locked. My hands were shaking as I ran to the front door and the side entrance to make sure everything was secure. I texted my family, explaining what had happened. My dad told me to turn on the backyard lights and check if anyone was still there. He encouraged me to be brave and handle the situation. I grabbed a kitchen knife for protection and stepped onto the deck. The backyard seemed empty at first, but when I looked down, I saw wet footprints leading away from the lake. They were barefoot prints, half dried by then. Following the trail around the deck, I froze in horror. Just below the edge of the deck, I saw a pair of eyes and a forehead peeking up at me. It was as if the person had been waiting for me to notice them. As soon as we locked eyes, they turned and ran. Shaking, I rushed back inside and called 911. The police arrived shortly after. They asked if my family had any enemies or issues with neighbors, but we couldn't think of anyone. They did a sweep of the property but didn't find anyone. That night, I shut every window and turned on the air conditioning, hoping it would make me feel safer. The next morning, I was relieved to see the sunlight streaming in. Thankfully, whoever that man was never returned, and to this day, we still don't know who he could have been. I have a dog who I take for walks 3 times a day, first in the morning, then in the afternoon, and finally at night. I always take him on the same route, starting at our driveway exit, which leads to a cul-de-sac parking lot for the townhouse complex we live in. This detail will make sense soon as to why I'm mentioning it. On our nightly walk, I tend to go out somewhat late. It's just become a habit since I've had him, and it's never caused any problems. until one particular night. I began our final walk of the day like usual, taking our usual route. I had a flashlight with me since the parking lot doesn't have any lights, and I was listening to music with just one earbud in, something I always do in case I hear anything unusual. And on this night I did. As we were approaching the parking lot, I heard something, some kind of voice up ahead. I was so zoned out, lost in my music, that at first I didn't process it. Then my mind caught up and I stopped walking. I pulled out my earbud and stood still to listen, unsure if I'd really heard anything. That's when I heard it again. It was a voice coming from ahead of me, but I couldn't see anyone. I made the unwise decision to keep walking forward cautiously, convincing myself it was just my imagination. But something about it felt off. After taking a few steps and reaching the area where the cars were parked, I stopped again. I aimed my flashlight all around in front of me and stayed quiet, listening carefully. That's when it happened, the creepiest thing I've ever experienced. I heard a muffled voice, and it said the word help. My heart sank. It happened so fast I felt frozen, unable to move my legs. I frantically pointed my flashlight everywhere, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. I was convinced it was coming from the cars, but I couldn't see anything. My dog didn't seem to notice at first and was sniffing around some bushes nearby, completely oblivious. Then I heard it again. Help! Spoken 3 more times. This time, it was coming from my left, near the parked cars. Panic started to set in. I didn't know what to think, but I knew I wasn't imagining it anymore when I noticed my dog's ears perk up. He stopped sniffing and turned to face the same direction I was looking. That's when it really hit me how unsettling this situation was. After hearing the voice multiple times, I realized something even stranger. The voice didn't sound entirely like a child. It was eerie, a mix between an adult and a child's voice. Every time the word help was spoken, it sounded muffled, almost like it was coming through a barrier. It also didn't sound like a genuine plea for help. It was monotone, without any emotion or urgency. There was no variation in the tone, pitch, or inflection. It felt wrong, completely unnatural. My dog and I ran straight home after that. When we got back, I tried explaining everything to my mom. She was puzzled, but didn't think it was anything serious. I suggested calling the police just in case someone was actually in danger, but she didn't think it was necessary. I couldn't stop thinking about all the questions swirling in my head. Why was the voice muffled? Was someone hiding in one of the cars where I couldn't see them? Or was it something far darker waiting for me to get closer? Even now, I don't like to dwell on it too much because it still makes me feel deeply disturbed. I've included this picture to show where I stopped and first heard the voice. The sound came from up ahead, on the left, near the parked cars. For context, there's a condo complex to the right, which some might think the noise could have come from, but it was clearly coming from the left where the vehicles were. At the time, the parked cars were mostly SUVs and trucks, making it harder to see anything from where I was standing. I've never been able to figure out what happened that night, but the memory still haunts me. What I'm about to share is the reason my family decided to leave a house that had been in the family for 3 generations. I've battled depression for most of my life. It's always been difficult to shake the feeling of being useless. I'm in a much better place now, but as a child it was overwhelming. I spent a lot of time alone in my room because of it. Our house was located in a very wooded area. It was surrounded by trees on 3 sides, with a forest separating it from any neighbors. My bedroom was larger than average for a kid, situated in the back corner of the house. The 2 windows in my room both faced the woods, which felt unnerving for someone my age. To make things worse, I was terrified of the dark. The strange event started when I was about 11 years old. I was in 6th grade at the time, and by then, it wasn't considered acceptable to run to my parents' bed after a nightmare. My parents often chalked up my fears to having an overactive imagination. The first thing I noticed was with my nightlight. It had adjustable LED settings, and I always kept it on red. It was comforting to me. One night, I woke up randomly, which was unusual for me. I was too groggy to think much of it and fell back asleep quickly, but I noticed my nightlight wasn't red. It had switched to another color. A week later, the same thing happened. I woke up and found the nightlight set to a different color again. I asked my parents if they had been changing it, but they looked confused and assured me they hadn't touched it. They told me it was likely a glitch, and I believed them, for a while. Then one morning I woke up to find my nightlight completely unplugged and lying on the floor. My parents dismissed my concern again, saying I must have done it in my sleep or that I was focusing too much on silly things instead of school. My dad even said I was getting too old for a nightlight. A few days later, the nightlight disappeared entirely. It was as if it had vanished into thin air. That's when I became convinced my parents had taken it to force me to outgrow it. I confronted them and it turned into a massive argument. Both sides accused the other of lying, and neither of us was willing to back down. After that, things seemed to settle down for about a week. Then, the late-night disturbances began. 3 nights in a row, I woke up in the middle of the night for no apparent reason. Each time, I couldn't figure out what had woken me. After the 4th consecutive night, I told my parents. They dismissed it as part of puberty, saying it was normal for my body to experience changes. The next time it happened, I decided to stay awake instead of going back to sleep. A few minutes after waking up, I heard faint rustling noises coming from my closet. I told my parents, but they didn't believe me. My dad even checked the closet and found nothing except my old toys and posters. The next 4 nights remained the most terrifying of my life. Every time I woke up, I would hear rustling from the closet. It felt like psychological torture. I begged my parents to believe me, but my dad became frustrated. One night, he stormed into my room to prove there was nothing there. He started throwing my toys around, clearing out the closet piece by piece while scolding me. Then, he pulled one of the posters off the closet wall. My parents froze, staring in horror at a massive hole behind it. My mom started screaming while my dad grabbed a flashlight. The hole was so deep we couldn't see where it led. My dad ran outside to check the exterior of the house and found a small opening at the base of the wall. A little digging revealed a passageway leading from the woods directly into my room. That night, my mom and I packed our things and went to stay at my aunt's house. My dad joined us later, and we moved out of that house not long after. I stayed with my aunt until we found a new place. To this day, I don't like thinking about the experience. My parents refuse to discuss it, likely because they feel guilty for not believing me sooner. It's chilling to imagine that someone was in my room night after night for over a month. I'll probably never know what they wanted. If your kids ever come to you with something that sounds strange or unusual, please believe them. My name is Aaron. To be completely honest, I'm feeling a bit lost in life right now. I won't bore you with all the details, but here's the gist. My family situation is a complete mess. For the past 3 years, I've done everything I can to stay away from home. My close friends from high school have changed in ways I can't relate to anymore, and it feels like my hometown has nothing left to offer me. I'm heading into my final year of college, but the truth is, I have no clue what I'm going to do after that. Enough with the pity party, though. Let me get to the story. Last year, I found myself in Prague for reasons I can't entirely explain, maybe searching for some kind of purpose or direction in life. I remember the name of the bar I was in, Nova. I was there by myself, which honestly isn't unusual for me. I was getting ready to leave when I patted my pocket and realized my apartment keys were gone. Just my luck. I stumbled out of the bar, heading back to my apartment anyway, hoping I'd somehow left the door unlocked. No such luck. The whole place was locked up tight, and it was way too late at night to get a replacement set. I'm not sure what most people would do in a situation like that, but my first thought was to find somewhere to sleep. As if things weren't bad enough, it started raining. Eventually, I found myself under a nearby bridge. I didn't even know exactly where I was, but at least I was out of the rain and relatively safe. That was good enough for me at the moment. As I was drifting off, I started hearing faint voices from across the river. I sat up and saw what looked like 5 men standing on the opposite bank, along with a small boat tied up nearby. They hadn't noticed me. It didn't take me long to realize what I was watching. An actual drug deal, or something sketchy like that, was happening right in front of me. My check isn't great, so I couldn't make out exactly what they were saying, but briefcases and duffel bags were changing hands. I didn't need a translation to fill in the blanks. I thought about leaving to find another spot, but I didn't want to risk drawing attention to myself. I figured I'd just wait it out and leave once they were gone. Suddenly, one of the men yelled something aggressively in Czech and pulled a gun on another guy. There was a brief, tense silence before the man being threatened put his hands up and started talking really fast. It looked like he was being set up. The other men stripped the guy at gunpoint, taking his clothes and anything else he had on him. At that point, I didn't feel safe staying there anymore. I slowly got up, trying not to make a sound. But just as I moved, I heard one of the men shout something that roughly translated to, "There's someone there." I didn't even look back, I just started running. I could hear them yelling behind me, but the only words I clearly understood were, "Don't shoot." I ran as fast as I could, my heart pounding. I kept going until I was physically sick and nearly passed out from exhaustion. I knew there was no way they'd catch me, but the thought that they could have shot me stayed in my mind. Sometimes I still think about how close I came to losing my life that night. If they'd decided to fire at me, I wouldn't be here today. Sometimes it feels like I'm fated to keep running forever. It was a normal Wednesday afternoon at my high school. I was walking down a hallway with my friend Mia as she chatted about God knows what. I was just trying to make it through the day because I had a lot on my plate. Things weren't great at home, and school wasn't much better. My foster parents weren't exactly the kindest people, to say the least. As we walked past the lunchroom, I suddenly realized I needed to use the bathroom. I asked Mia if she needed to go, but she said no, and that she'd wait outside for me. I headed into the bathroom and immediately noticed something strange. There was no one else in there. That was unusual because out of all the bathrooms in the school, this one was always crowded no matter the time of day. I shrugged it off and went into a stall. A few seconds after sitting down, I heard the bathroom entrance door open and close abruptly. Someone had entered the bathroom, but I didn't hear them move after that. I didn't think much of it. Maybe it was someone trying to avoid a teacher or admin. I went about my business, stood up, and buttoned my jeans while glancing at the scribbles and random quotes on the bathroom stall wall. There were plenty of rants about teachers and other nonsense. Suddenly, I heard the door open again, and I assumed whoever had come in earlier must have left. When I stepped out of the stall, Mia was standing outside the bathroom with the weirdest expression on her face. Something between shock and confusion. Almost like a "what the hell did I just see" kind of look. I asked her what was wrong, and she asked me, "Who was that standing right behind you in the stall?" A chill ran down my spine. I told her no one was in there with me and to quit messing with me, but Mia wasn't joking. She swore she wasn't making it up. She said she had come into the bathroom seconds before I came out because she realized she did need to go after all. But then, she noticed someone else in the stall with me, standing so close behind me, that their shoes were practically touching mine. She said she left immediately, not wanting to see or deal with whatever was going on. I repeated firmly that I was the only one in the stall. However, I admitted to Mia that I had heard someone enter earlier, but figured they were just hiding from an admin since they didn't use the bathroom or move around. That's when Mia said something that made my stomach sink. She told me no one went near the bathroom door until she walked in just seconds before I stepped out of the stall. I didn't believe in the paranormal, but this shook me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I found an admin and told her what had happened, but she brushed it off and assured me it was nothing. She even suggested that Mia was probably just playing a prank on me, but Mia wasn't the type to take things seriously, let alone pull off an elaborate joke like this. When she looked me in the eyes and described word for word what she saw, I couldn't help but believe her. Between her reaction and the fact that I distinctly heard the bathroom door open and close twice, I couldn't ignore the possibility that something unexplainable had just happened. I'm 19 now, and I still haven't forgotten that day. It's something I think about often, and it still gives me chills.